Hello, lassies and lads. Welcome to another episode of Unfollow, Question Everything. If you were here last week, you got to hear the amazing Colette Fehr. I hope that you loved the episode and that had many golden nuggets. So if you are just coming into the season now, I highly recommend you go back to our episode 1, which was 5 questions to ask yourself to change your life. They are so good. We had the best conversation. You will love it. But now, today, we're moving in a different direction. I'm super excited about this because this is Colette's world. She is an expert in couple therapy, and she has a beautiful personal story of why. But this is going to be 5 questions to ask yourself to bring the spark back into your relationship. I am so excited about this episode. Welcome, Colette. We're so glad you're back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back. I'm excited to be here.
So why are you a couple therapist?
I know people,
Let's go right there. Let's just go right there, Colette. Let's just go.
Some people think I'm crazy actually for doing this because I'm one of very few therapists who now only works with couples. So many people who specialize in this field still see individuals, and I used to do that as well. But I decided to make my practice exclusively focus on couples because it's really my passion. And I got into the work because almost 20 years ago, I went through a very messy, painful divorce while I had young children. And it really kind of rattled my whole world in ways I didn't anticipate, although I had wanted the divorce. And we had tried to fix the marriage, my ex-husband and I, and saw a counselor who wasn't properly trained and did more harm than good. And I was very young and didn't know what I didn't know, but I could feel something wasn't right. And it inspired me to go back to graduate school and really learn to do this the right way so that I could help people who want to save their marriages to do so with the right amount of, ethics and evidence-based models and sensitivity to 2 valid perspectives within one family unit. So it's really dear to my heart.
I love it. And we've talked a little bit about this, that for many people, if they had great help, their marriages would be intact and their families would be together. And I think that's like one of the harsh realities is, right? Like where sort of the communication breaks down, we seek help, but the help doesn't help. Right. And so I am just very, very grateful as someone who has done a lot of couple therapy in my own marriage and relationship. I've done couple retreats. I've done Gottman Institute workshops. Like I'm heavily invested in this world and my own marriage as well as with my clients. Yeah. But I just want to thank you for going back and getting that PhD and getting the all of the extra information to make you this wonderful couple therapist that we get to get access to for some time today. And you have some questions for us that are going to bring that spark back. Now, why do you think people would need to bring their spark back? Why does it not just stay there, Colette?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that. But first, I do want to just say I do not have a PhD. So I just want to clarify that. I have a master's in mental health counseling and marriage and family therapy. And then I have many years of additional training in couples therapy. And I'm a certified emotionally focused couples therapist, which is the gold standard in evidence-based treatment. But I never want to. I thank you for making me sound even more fabulous than maybe I am. But I just want to make sure I'm not taking credit for an educational degree that I do not have.
Well, thank you for clarifying. Yes, I appreciate it. My bad. But we're grateful for all of the education in your massive brain that we get access to today. Thank you.
Thank you. My massive brain thanks you. So, Okay, why don't we keep the spark? Yes, we don't because it's not scientifically possible. At the beginning of a relationship, many people, but not all, experience something called limerence. And there's a lot of confusion about what limerence is. Many people think it's a destructive form of toxic love where you're high and it's unrequited. But that's not what limerence is. Limerence is when you experience with someone a surge of dopamine, PEA, oxytocin, which are pleasure hormones and bonding hormones. And in part, this is nature's way of ensuring that we connect with someone long enough from an old time scientific perspective that we pair bond and procreate, because that was nature's original goal. So during this stage, there's so much pleasure surging through your body that it can feel almost like being addicted to someone. And it's part of the bonding process. Now, some people don't get so limerent, but many, many people do. And so during that time, differences are minimized. Even the flaws that somebody has, if we notice them, we think, oh, but that's so cute. And incompatibilities don't even seem like incompatibilities. If they're like, my ex-husband was into duck hunting and I was like going out on a John boat with alligators. I mean, I would never do that now. I hate all that. Right? I'm like, oh, you like Metallica? Me too. I hate Metallica. Sorry, Metallica lovers out there. That's not my thing. So, you just are so enthralled with a person and it feels natural. And this phase lasts about 6 months and it can last as long as 3 years. And then we go into a different phase where we actually have an opportunity to develop real, deeper, emotionally intimate love, what some people call companionate or affectional love. Or sometimes people, once they lose that spark and glow that they mistake for real love, then they get bored and they move on or they become dissatisfied. But that's when the real work begins. Once what people call, I'm calling limerence, but people refer to typically as the honeymoon stage. When that passes, then we've got a real person with flaws who is going to annoy us in some, if not myriad ways. And we make a commitment to really knowing and sharing ourselves with that person, we can develop something even deeper and better than the limerent period.
Yeah, it's so funny, and not to make total light of it, but if
Yeah.
you're a fan of the show Friends, it's
Yeah.
that episode. You know what episode I'm talking about? That episode
No,
where
remind me.
So Chandler and Monica have moved out of their limerence stage, and now they're in this stage where they are like talking exactly where you are, where you can have this intimacy and emotional relationship, but they're out on this double date with this couple who is in the limerence stage, and they're kissing and hugging and like all over each other. And Monica gets so jealous and she takes Chandler to the bathroom and tries to have sex with him in the bathroom and tries to like make it all like crazy. And Chandler's like, what is going on? And she's like, no, we have to be in as love as they are. Like, what are we doing here? It's just, and then Chandler gets to this beautiful point in Fran's story where he's like, but I don't want that. Like, I want what we have here. Like, I want this deeper emotional connection that will last forever. And then, of course, Monica's like, okay, but it just, everything you were describing there was like that total episode of like, yes, like it's no longer in that I have to touch you every second of every day. And like, if I'm not touching you, I'm not okay.
Exactly.
To like this, like, I don't know. I saw a meme the other day and it was like, said that true love was like being bored with each other,
Yeah, I
like
love
you're
that.
both
I
just,
love that.
right? Like, and
Yeah.
it's just, but I think that a lot of people don't know this and they mistake that transition to like some sort of failure in their relationship or some sort of it's not working out anymore and let me go find someone else where I can have this limerence again. And I think when we see a lot
Exactly.
of hopping around, like that's what that is.
100%. It's so common. And some people have never seen a really deep, intimate relationship modeled in their families.
Yeah.
Culture and media, pop culture and media really show us romanticized, limerent versions of relationships as
Mm-hmm.
if it's the
Mm-hmm.
ideal. So we're confused about it, understandably.
Totally.
But, just when that really supercharged, sparky phase ends and this great relationship begins, where you can deepen your connection, it's still worth it to try to keep the spark alive, even though the spark might look different. And that comes
Yes.
through emotional intimacy, connection, and some of these questions we're going to explore today.
Yes, so let's get going. Number one, how did I show my partner they were important to me in the first year of our relationship? And am I still doing those things?
So this goes back to when you might have been feeling limerent about your partner, and it's certainly not suggesting that you have to, if you wanted to touch them every minute of the day, which is such a good one, that's so common. You don't have to Velcro yourself to your partner. It's not even realistic. But I do think sometimes when we look back, we can get clues about ways we showed our partner they were important that we've completely stopped doing. Know I used to write my husband these little notes and do all these little like cute things to just show I'm thinking of you. And I'll just call myself out right now. I'm not doing any of that. So, and I've been married now. I've been with my husband for 12 years, married for 8 years. And just like you said, we two have done tons of couples therapy, retreats, workshops. My husband has been an amazingly good sport on leaning into all of this with me. One, because I believe in investing in the relationship. And two, because it's really good for me to experience things as a client to see what it's like to sit
Absolutely.
on the other side. Yeah. So I think if you look back to what were the ways I showed my partner that they were important, you can go, okay, is there some version of that I could bring back a little if that meant something to them? Really taking the time, little things add up and go a long way. And it can be as simple as telling your partner what you appreciate about them every day. We
Yeah.
know from research, from the Gottman research, that every person needs to hear at least 5 positives for every one negative to feel loved. So if you can't find anything you were doing in the limerent phase, start with appreciation. In a long-term relationship, we get very negatively focused and we only talk about the things that are bothering us. It's okay to bring up what bothers you and it's good even, but you've got to balance it out with saying, hey, thanks so much for taking out the garbage this morning. That's usually my job. And when I went to do it and saw you had done it, that was such a nice surprise, right? It's such a little thing that we might not otherwise articulate. Say it out loud. Every human being likes to feel valued and seen.
Well, I love that. And I definitely encourage my couples to do that. Like, often we'll start with tell me like a couple great things that your husband did this week. Tell me a couple great things that your wife did this week, right? Because I do think sometimes, and I'm sure that you have ways around this, but I do think sometimes that, if you have a weekly therapy appointment or a weekly coaching appointment or a weekly mentor appointment, that you sometimes save up all of your things that they did wrong and then you bring it and then you're like, here you go. This is all the things that were done wrong this week by this other
Yes.
individual that's in my life that I love. Here they
Yeah,
all are. Now, what are you going to do with them? And you're like, oh, well, that's a lot of things,
exactly.
that you saved up
Exactly.
for this week, and I think like for our work often, and I think that this is why I believe so deeply in this particular work, is because it allows you to use tools outside of your therapy session,
Right.
outside of your coaching session, where you're coming to the sessions with, well, we actually sat down and we had a conversation about money and it wasn't comfortable. And I have
Right.
now don't have the Amazon app on my phone. And I'm doing
Yeah.
some of these things that we've spoken about because the tools are what help you get that spark back, get that communication better, and be able to figure out what is important to each other. Because I think, kind of like we talked about in the last episode, sometimes we start to not know what does make them tick or what they do love or appreciate. Like, do they care if I leave a note on their sink before they go to work? Do they, you know what I mean? Like, and it's giving
Exactly.
the tools, Colette, to have these conversations with your partner, whether, you're married or whether you're just newly dating, but like having these conversations so you get to know them on a deeper level.
Exactly. What makes you feel loved? For my
Yeah.
husband, for me, and everyone loves the love languages, and, they're controversial to a degree in the counseling field because they're not evidence based. But I think it misses the point to not pay attention to the intention of a love language. Most of us actually may feel loved through many of those mechanisms at different times. But I know that I need physical touch and I need words are the ways that I primarily show love and receive love best. And it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate acts of service, which is my husband's primary love language. But, that's not really the thing that makes me feel the most loved. So, knowing those things and having those conversations, and not just what's your love language, but what little things, when I do these things, you feel more love. For example, when you put your hand on my leg and leave it there while we're watching TV, I feel so loved. Someone else, that might be nice, but kind of a nothing burger. But for somebody, that might really transmit such a signal. And if we can know and understand those things about each other and make a little effort, it goes a long way.
Yeah, or the opposite. Actually, I prefer to sit and watch TV and not be touched all the time because I've been touched by 4 kids today. And I
Right.
would just really love to like watch the show and have good conversation about it, right? Like, and it's
Yes.
like if we don't have the conversations and we just keep quiet all the time and we don't say it, like we're not being true to ourselves or the relationship. And then I think that's when the cracks come, Colette.
Yeah, yeah, and resentment can grow. And it's such a good point. When you're in the active stage of raising children, a lot of women do not want to be touched, want to be in silence, want to enjoy something in parallel connection, right? You're sitting beside me, but I have my own autonomous space. We're watching a show together, but I get to just not have to engage, right? That's a luxury
Yeah,
when you have young kids. It's
I know.
all about just expressing what's true for you and giving your partner, we don't want to leave anyone guessing about anything. That's where misunderstanding creeps into on every level. If I have to read your signals from the outside and guess what you're thinking and needing and feeling, we're going to get in trouble fast.
Yeah. And I think like that again goes back to some of the tools, right? Because if I say something to you and you react in a way that feels unsafe to me or like that wasn't worth it. Like it wasn't worth it to communicate that thing to you because it ended up in a fight and then you didn't talk to me for a couple days,
Yeah.
then I'm backpedaling, right? Then I'm like in this place where you're like, oh, well, it wasn't worth it to communicate it. So like
Right.
I'm not going to.
Right, and actually that's what my whole book is about, that I'll have a book coming out on relationship communication specifically and primarily for women, but not till the end of next year, and it's called The Cost of Quiet, and quiet isn't always quiet, right? Quiet can be any type of avoidant behavior. You're criticizing your partner instead of sharing your deeper feelings and needs. When we get a bad reaction, let's just call it a bad reaction, such as defensiveness or dismissiveness from our partner, it's very easy to go, oh, well, that didn't feel good and that didn't go well. So I'm not going to do that again. It's very human. However, we really have a responsibility to ourselves emotionally to
Mhm.
stand firmly in our truth and say, it looks like you're having trouble hearing me right now, but this is really important. And I'm sharing something in service of having a more connected relationship with you. Can we try again, or can we revisit this in an hour or two? I'd really like to be heard. Now, you can't guarantee that anyone will take your message in, but when you say clearly and vulnerably and assertively what you feel and need, that's going to feel good inside you regardless. And you give your partner an opportunity to hear you clearly and respond.
Well, and I love what you said there. Like, I'm telling you this and saying this in service of our relationship, right? Like, it
Yes.
is, and that is so important. Like, those three
Yes.
words, like, it's in service of your relationship, is just vital. Like, I'm not
Yes.
saying it to hurt you, to be against you. I'm on your team. We're in the same team.
Yep.
And I think this conversation could help our relationship.
Exactly. I love how you said that too. It's always a team approach.
Mm.
I'm sharing with you not to criticize you. I'm sharing with you so that you can know me more and I can know you and we can work on this together so that we're closer. And that has a way of really disarming people.
Yeah. Question number two. If I overheard my partner talking to a friend about our relationship, what would they say is going well and what would they say isn't working? Tell me
So
about this question.
yeah, so this is about perspective taking and a way to help you
Okay.
access perspective taking. That if you just spend a little time contemplating, because sometimes we're all a little bit conflict avoidant for the most part, right? And somebody who's fighting and combative, I even assert that that's a form of conflict avoidance because really healthy conflict is a calm, vulnerable, direct conversation. And a lot of people rely on anger is the only way or time they address a situation, right? It builds up, it builds up. I'm trying to not say anything and then eventually I blow or they
Mm-hmm.
just don't say anything at all. So when you take a minute to think about, we've always got to be evaluating our relationship. Two people living side by side in such intimacy, there are going to be problems and disagreements, no matter who you are, how you were raised, how perfect your childhood, how smart, how evolved. I could go on. So this gives you a chance to say, okay, how do I think my partner, now this is not a replacement for asking your partner. I want you to do that too, to address these things. But these are questions for you to begin to get curious before you approach your partner. How do I think my partner is experiencing our relationship? Am I really showing up? Do I think they think I'm showing up? Have I been affectionate? Have I been attentive? Am I on my phone all night, every night, because I'm so burned out from my job that I can't even imagine? I have nothing left in my battery to give my husband after I've given it to my job and my kids. So, really, to assess if you heard your partner sitting with their friends and their friends said, their best friend said, like, wow, how's it going at home? And they said, Melissa's so great. She does all this stuff for the kids. Like, I'm so in love with her, and she's so good at telling me, expressing her appreciation. But, on the other hand, I feel like she doesn't really have a lot of time for me. And sometimes I question if I'm important to her. Right? Even an imaginal, obviously, I'm making all this up, an imaginal version of this can help you say, what do I think my partner's getting from me? And how do I think they see it? Being curious about that and then hopefully leading to a point of going to them and saying, I've been reflecting and I feel like maybe I've been kind of distracted lately, or maybe I've been a little short with you because I'm super stressed and I maybe have been taking it out on you, which we all do to those closest to us, but it really isn't good for a relationship. Hey, partner, do you see it that way too? Like, what's going on in the relationship for you? What's working? What's not working? Let's talk about it. I'm open and I want your feedback.
I love it. I do that exercise with some of my couples where I will have them pretend to be the other person and say what they think are all the issues. And then the other person will say all the issues that they think it is. And it is just like, it is really, I feel like it is so powerful, Colette,
I
to
love that.
actually try to imagine, right? Like imagine you're the other person, which essentially what this question is saying, right? Like you're in a moment trying to figure out what are they saying and what are they feeling about our relationship from their
Yeah.
perspective. It's just so
Yes.
unique.
I love that exercise. I'm going to do that with my husband. I can't wait to hear what he thinks I would say about the issues. And even already, as you said that,
Yeah.
I started thinking about the perspective, like what might be going on for him. And if I were in his
Mhm.
shoes, how might I be experiencing? We're both so busy right now. We haven't had as much time for a connection. So, how might he be experiencing that versus how I'm experiencing it with our very different personalities? So, not only
Mhm.
perspective, but it gives you a real access to empathy for the other person and understanding it from their worldview.
And I think it's, it is, I definitely, relationships have never been, or marriage has never been like super easy for me. Like, it's not something I feel like I naturally thrive at, like compared to motherhood. Like, I feel like I have naturally thrived at motherhood. Like, that's my jam. Like, I got it
Yeah.
down, right? It's all about organization and rules and like, it's great. It's like, you know,
Yep.
and then like the personality of whoever it is that you're in the relationship with, and I am a very, and I always have been, like, very independent, and I love a lot of autonomy, and like a lot of these are like individualistic type things where
Sure.
I like to achieve things on my own, like, writing a book. I was like a runner growing up, which is again a very individualistic, like where the pressure is on me, like the results are on me. And I think when you have that personality and you bring that into a marriage where it is not just one person, it is on two people, and just the dynamic of that, it's just very interesting to do this particular exercise to be like, oh, like, what would it like to be married to someone like that? Like, where,
Yeah.
the sure, they're a great mother, and I'm super happy that my kids have a great mother, but like, where are we?
Right. Right. I love that. And I think it's so great that you say that because marriage doesn't, of course, work in a relationship. It shouldn't be torture, but it does really require energy and an investment. And a truly healthy relationship really doesn't come that naturally to anyone. We have a modern
Hmm.
situation where we live a long time, most of us. Marriage used to be about an economic proposition to run a farm and
Yeah.
consolidate funds and have as many children as possible who would potentially survive to run the farm. And we lived to
I
about
might have done very well, Colette. I might
actually
have
you
done,
would have.
I,
You would
I might have done very well back
to-
then.
totally, totally. But we didn't have all
It
of
would have been
this.
a very well run farm. It would have been,
Yes.
the farm would have been doing great.
Yes, you're perfectly suited for that phase too. But this
Perfect.
whole
Perfect.
time of like emotional needs and being connected and emotional intimacy, it's a relatively modern thing. It is a beautiful thing that we're
Yeah.
designed for as human beings because we know that we need connection. The Harvard study of adult development that I know I've heard you talk about as well, that show that
Yep.
relationships are the single most important factor, not just to living a good life, but to living longer. So we know we're
No.
wired for this, but we've just started to get into this phase of time where marriage really requires us to dig in and put in a lot of emotional effort. And as a result, it's a crucible for developing emotional maturity and developing
Yeah.
ourselves as individuals. So it's worth the investment, but it's not something that comes naturally or easily, I think, to almost anyone, truly.
Yeah. And I think also, to your earlier point, like, what was modeled for you? What did you see
Yeah.
growing up? Like, did you see parents that sort of showed the importance of the relationship, or did you see parents that showed, parent centric family, or and I
Yes.
like to try to do like that family centric, like where the family is like what is the best for everybody, like because there's
Yeah.
six of us in this house. But obviously there are all different models, and
Yeah.
like which one is best for your family, but like which one was modeled to you is
Yep.
also like, okay, there might be some unfollowing that I need to do of some of these things because they don't work in this modern marriage that I'm in right now. And I've been with
Exactly.
my husband for 20 years. I met him when I was 20 and I'm now 40. And so I'm not the same person. He's not the
Right.
same person, and we have five kids in between there. And a
Exactly.
son who had stage 4 cancer, and like we adopted a child, and there's been a lot of things in 20 years. So
Yeah.
a lot of couples, they have their relationship, but they also have this whirlwind of life that goes around them too.
Exactly. And it's so true. You're not the same person. We're always growing and changing. And that's why we've got to be curious about where things are and paying attention and having difficult conversations so that we can grow together as the new people we become over the long run.
Yeah, talk about that a lot too. And I think it's more, if you have a newer relationship, this might not be as important. But I think for relationships that, are longer, like yours, like mine's, like maybe a lot of the listeners, it is important to, sometimes sort of put a reset button on some of the things. There are some things that like you can't change. Like they've happened in your marriage, they are there, they're not going away. But like, what are you building from now? Like, what do you want? And that's a lot of the work that my husband and I have done in our marriage is like, well, what do we want it to be like from here? Like, what does it look like now going forward? Right.
Yep. Absolutely. It's so important. And it's so great to hear you describe having those kind of conversations and thinking about those things. That's all it is,
Well,
right?
you
Paying
got you got
attention.
two lawyers in this house. I'm married to a lawyer. My training was a lawyer. Now I talk to people for a living. So there's a lot of conversations.
Yeah, that's great though. That's great.
Yeah. And like you said, like a lot of work, and I wrote about that in my book where, I did get to that point of where it was like, I'm done. Like I can't keep doing this. This feels
Yeah.
too hard. It feels too much.
Yeah.
And what we had to do is exactly what we're talking about right now, which is like, okay, like if we are building a marriage from like this date forward, what do we want it to look like? What does marriage mean to us? Like, how do we
Yep.
define it? What are our values in it? And again, like to everybody that's listening at home who is maybe thinking, I can't bring my spark back. I can't figure out how to get this relationship back on the tracks. I was very close to being divorced, and I'm not now. And I think that just required honest, hard conversations that,
Yes.
neither of us wanted to have. And I think that this work is just so important because I don't know how you do it without the help, Colette.
I
Like
agree.
we couldn't, and we're both, I think, pretty educated,
Yeah.
good with our words, good with conversation, and it was like we didn't know how to do it.
Yeah, no, I do think people need help. And I think for the listener, let me just say, as someone who sits with couples all day, every day for many, many years, it is amazing how relationships, even on the brink of divorce, can often turn around. Now, I'm not saying every marriage can or should be saved because I don't believe that. I don't think that's fair to people. And I am also
Mm-hmm.
passionate about reframing divorce as not a failure, but rather
Yeah.
the end of a season for a relationship, and that's okay too. However, it is really possible to turn things around, and starting with small actions daily, little tiny things, even that these questions can lead to, goes a long way. I ended up divorced in my first marriage, and I think if we had gotten better help, we actually could have saved the marriage. It's all's well that ends well because my ex-husband's remarried and seems very happily married. I'm remarried. But my husband and I also went through, even in our 12 years together, shortly after we married, we blended a family. It was very complex. We
Mm-hmm.
both have two daughters,
Mm-hmm.
and it almost fell apart. I mean, I thought we were
Yep.
going to get divorced, and it came as a
Mm-hmm.
shock to me because our relationship had been so solid prior to our marriage. And we had to do a lot of work and go through a lot of growing pains. And we struggled to communicate, even as a couples therapist. It was very difficult, but we made it through. And we also made that choice that that was what we both wanted. So if you want your relationship, it really is as simple as starting with acknowledging maybe everything's not perfectly rosy, and that's okay because that's real life. But let's have the courage to face what isn't working and talk about it. And then really also acknowledge the positives and celebrate those.
Yeah, I love that. And I really appreciate you sharing that because I think, that's very brave to share on the podcast. And I think that we're both being very open and sharing intimate things. And I think that everybody at home really needs to hear it, Colette. Like,
Yeah.
and I think for you to say this was challenging as a couple therapist is really
Yeah.
beautiful and vulnerable and brave of you because
Thank you.
I think that, trying to save my marriage was one of the hardest things that I've ever done. And I've had a son with stage 4 cancer who almost didn't make it. And it was equally as painful to try to figure it out and
Yeah.
figure out, whether it was going to be what it was going to be. And that's that's the reason why I think this work is so powerful, because without the help, without the real experts, like, it would be a very different situation.
Exactly.
And then, when you get to do the work and you see, couples come to you and they really have no way of talking to each other and no
Yeah.
communication skills, and a lot of resentment and a lot of pain, and it's all legitimate. But also, how do we like break it apart and move forward and build something new? Because like
Yes.
a lot of those things, in some couples, they have affairs or they have these, different
Yep.
situations that are, that they're not changeable. And
Right.
so moving forward, I think some of these questions that you're asking are just really powerful, because they just give that perspective of the other person, right? Because we do live in our own feelings a lot. Like, we live in a lot, like, I was definitely in that phase of where, I was living all up in how I was feeling and what my emotions were and what I felt was lacking. And I didn't take my eyes away from myself and look at, like, well, what is like he feeling and what's hard for him
Right.
and what's he lacking.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. And you're making such a good point. People need help. And one of the reasons I'm so willing to be honest about my own struggle is that I think people do feel alone and they think it's just their relationship, and it's not. This is stuff that everyone goes through. Even in the best marriages, most people will tell you that they had a difficult season, if not many difficult seasons, and that there were times they didn't know if they wanted to be married or if they'd make it through. I mean, I think it's just realistic, as we're two people in a long-term thing, growing, changing. There's so many demands on individuals in modern society. It's just more complicated than it used to be. Yeah, and
I
it's
heard
we
this
gotta
really
acknowledge
great
it. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. I heard this really great quote by Gwyneth Paltrow, and she said that it was about her parents, and I think they'd been married for 60 years. And she said that her dad said the only reason they were not divorced was because both of them didn't want a divorce at the same time. Like,
Yes.
what, the mom wanted to divorce at one point, the dad wanted to divorce at one point, but never both at the same time. And I was like,
Yes.
man, that is like so beautiful and so cool to hear someone of 60 years of marriage say that. Because
I
that was one
agree.
of the things my husband kept saying to me was, and my grandparents had been married for 60 years before my grand passed away, was like, do you think that Granny Jeannie and Papa Charlie didn't have seasons? Like, of course they did. Like, of
Exactly.
course. But I
Exactly.
think because people don't talk about it
Yeah.
so openly, that
Yeah.
it is sometimes hard to wrap your head around, Colette. Like, oh, other people have this. Like, oh, other people have these issues. Because, if we look on social media or we look at our friends, sometimes we think, like, oh, their marriage is so happy and so beautiful and so great. And, like, I wish I had that.
Yep.
But, like,
Yep.
they have their stuff. It's just not open.
Exactly. And I think it would be healthier for all of us if we could acknowledge this as a norm, that no one's marriage is perfect. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I think, we talked about this on the last episode that we did together, those 5 questions to change your life, was like, that it's not perfect, that things will not be, and that something not being great for a season does not make it a failure. In the last
Exactly.
episode, for those of you that didn't listen to it, we talked a lot about winning and learning and this idea that failure is not a thing. And I think one of the reasons why a lot of people don't talk about what's tough in their relationships, even with their girlfriends,
Yep.
is because it's like, well, then it seems like we're failing. It seems like we're
Exactly.
failing. And it's like, no, it seems like you're having a human experience.
Well
That's what you're
said.
having.
Exactly. Exactly. Welcome to being human.
Yeah, you get the full array of emotions.
Yep.
Congratulations, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
All right. So number 3, am I treating my partner like a soulmate or a roommate? Say more on this one.
It's easy to get into roommate mode. I've been there many times. We've all been guilty of it, particularly during a busy time. the familiarity of seeing somebody day in and day out, sharing children, sharing responsibilities, taking care of a home. And to some degree, it's okay. There's comfort in that. You're a partnership, you're a team. But if we ask ourselves how we're treating our partner, have we allowed that to become the default, where it's our exchanges are primarily about tasks, children, what time are you getting this? Did you get the mail? Who's going to the grocery store? And that's all there is. That might be okay for a little while, but that can become a default pattern that sets in. And over time, it's going to lead to a lot of disconnection. Now, soulmate does not mean it's not about flowers and romance. Some of the things that bring the spark back the most are surprisingly and ironically not what you would think of as romantic. So it can be as simple as planning a new experience together. This is a real research based thing because the brain craves novelty. So trying a new activity, going on a walk on a different route, exploring a hiking trail, even walking through your neighborhood on a different pathway, all of those things actually boost attraction in addition to appreciation. And then there are a couple of little things that I like to talk about a lot that boost connection and get you out of roommate mode. And you're probably familiar with these too, doing a 6-second kiss daily, doing a 20-second hug, having 10 minutes of cuddling. These are all research-based magic numbers that bring up a lot of oxytocin, which is the bonding neurochemical, and they reduce stress by lowering cortisol in the body. So you feel soothed and you feel connected, and you're not going to feel like as much of a roommate, even if you're still doing life together and all the logistical stuff. If you're taking 6 seconds, I'm not even talking about like a French kiss makeout, just like hold your lips together for 6 seconds, you're going to feel more bonded and connected. And I think this is hugely, hugely important.
I think again, we talked a little about this in the last episode where we think everything has to be so big and so major, and it's kind of like that. That the hardest part about going to the gym is thinking about going to the gym. Like
Yep.
that's the hardest part. It's not
Yep.
actually the gym, and it's like this stuff too can get like that where you're like, oh, But if you move past that, like it just becomes these new neural pathways, these new habits that you create,
Exactly.
and getting back to basics, really.
Exactly. Exactly. And making these new habits, that's the best way to say it. Habit formation is about new neural pathways. So it's as simple as
Yeah.
doing it. And this does not take a lot of time, nor does it have to be expensive or elaborate. Kiss your husband or wife goodbye in the morning. Hold the kiss for 6 seconds. At the end of the day, do a 20-second hug. Even if you don't go to bed at the same time, or some couples don't sleep in the same room, spend 10 minutes
Mm-hmm.
cuddling without, and this is one other important point I want to stress, without it being connected to sex. Now, sex is important for a relationship too, and that may be a whole nother conversation for another day, but it is hugely important that we separate physical affection from an expectation or pressure to have sex, because particularly for a lot of women, it can sometimes feel like any touch is a signal that I'm greenlighting sex, and that shouldn't feel that way and doesn't have to be the case. Keep it to just a
I think that
cuddle.
is so huge. That is
Yeah.
so huge, and I think that I know very few women that don't feel differently than that comment. Like if
Yeah.
I mean, literally have said that. Like if I give them a hug, or if I give them this, or I do this, then I'm signaling that sex is an option, and it's not, because I'm about to take the kids to school, or I'm about to just like jump in a shower
Right.
or go for a workout or whatever.
Exactly.
And so I think, like, again, like if you are working with a client and you sort of make that clear to both parties, like it shifts pretty instantly. It's pretty
Yeah.
like, okay, like sure, like this is just
Yes.
something that's new to our relationship, and it's not signaling that, like, that
Right.
the other party in the relationship takes that like, okay,
Exactly. Just make it explicit up front and agree that there's going to be
Yeah.
time, have sex other times, but that this cuddling time is not about sex, isn't going to lead to sex. We need affection. Now, there are some people who don't like to be touched, and I'm not saying, yeah, I'm not saying this is going to cover everybody. You've got to figure out what's right for you and what level of touch feels comfortable. But we are designed to be close and connected and to feel better when we can co-regulate with that proximity and some physical affection. So making that a part of your routine, if it's okay for you, will go a long way to getting away from roommate and back into soulmate.
I love it. It's beautiful. Okay, number 4. How much do we laugh together, and when is the last time we played and had fun?
Yeah. When we talked about this in the last episode too, we need it as individuals, but we also really need it in our relationship. And this is one of the things that is quick to go, not just getting into roommate mode, but just the busyness of life. We can only borrow so much time from our jobs and our careers. So we often borrow from our spouses, and it's just all the stuff we've got to get done. Or people go on these date nights because they think, okay, that's going to be good. But then they sit there and have nothing to say to each other. I always quote the movie Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind from 2004, when Kate Winslet and Jim Carrey are at a restaurant looking around and the couples are saying nothing to each other, just sort of pushing their food around on the plate, staring at the wall, and they call them the dining dead. You're not going to have a great date night if you don't have any connectivity. I know, I love it. So get back into some play, and you got to figure out what this looks like for you, but plan something silly. Go do an activity. It's not just the novelty of the experience. Go play mini golf, right? Even if you don't
Yeah.
like mini golf or care, just get back into that playful mode that brings your spirit alive, and having that experience with your partner, like we might have done in an early dating phase, brings a lot of joy and connection back into the relationship.
Yeah, I think that this is like really a big deal, because I
It
do
is.
think that most people think that dinner is like the only way you can go on a date.
Yep.
And my husband and I used to religiously go out for dinner on Saturday nights. We had like the same babysitter come, and it was just like there. And then it both ended up, both of us were just kind of like so fed up with it. Like, and we love food. Like, I know you said you
Yeah.
love food. Like, we're foodies. Like, that's
Yeah.
like, that is joy for us.
Yeah.
But we ended up like, we had like 3 restaurants, and it was like 3, like that we would end up going back and forward to. And we were like, yeah, we
Yeah.
got to do something else. Like, this doesn't work for us anymore. And it's
Yeah. It
just
gets
not what
stale.
we want to do with our spare time. Like, we don't want to go sit in a restaurant. And like, yeah, like, then we would have that rule of like, we're not allowed to talk about the kids, like we got to talk about something else. Like, we can't talk about these guys 24/7.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I love that. And if you're in a dating thing and you're foodies like we all are, it sounds like, and you're sick of doing the same routine, right? It gets stale. I've been in that phase too. For some people, it might even just be go to another side of town, try a new cuisine, or it's a
Yeah.
new activity, just something to get unstuck. But the activity part is great for laughter and play, because you're going to bring out the kid in you a little, go to a painting class, or I think a big thing lately is axe throwing, which I'm too scared to do. That freaks me out, but people
Yeah.
people love it. Go hiking with your partner somewhere you've never been before, go kayaking, go to a museum, whatever the hell it is. I love the idea of trying something new that you would never normally do. Like I just went to
I
goat
love that
yoga with
too.
my daughter, and it was so fun. And that would have been such a fun thing to do with my husband. And I
Yeah.
might do that.
Well, you
Yeah.
should do it with them for sure.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think I will. I
Don't
think I
tell,
will.
maybe not tell them what it is before you go.
Yes,
It's a
exactly.
surprise. It's a surprise.
Exactly. It's
We
perfect.
did this when my husband and I went to Spain earlier this year. We went by ourselves. It was just the two of us for 10
Mm,
days. It was magical. And
I bet.
one of the days I said, oh, I booked us an adventure. Like, tomorrow. Like, I'm going to take you there. And like, it was flamenco dancing. And I know that like, if I had given him, like a week in advance, like he would have been like, I'm not doing flamenco dancing with you. Like, we're not going to do
Right.
that. But we ended
Right.
up having so much fun. Like, we had so much fun doing it. Like, it was just pure joy. And actually, he was so much better than I was. I was terrible. Like, I was like legitimately like so uncoordinated, and the like teacher was laughing at me. Meanwhile, he's like living his best life, getting all the moves down. It was amazing.
That's great.
But
I
like, we
wanna
laugh
do that.
about that, and then we got to show the kids the videos, and like, it was just like different things. And I do agree that like the spark piece and finding new things to do is a big deal. Like doing
Yeah.
things you don't typically do, and
Yeah.
even if it's just like once a month to start with, where you're
Exactly.
like, you plan it this month, I'll plan it next month.
Yeah. I think that's perfect. It doesn't have to be that often. We just need some of this in our lives.
Yeah, I love it. All right. So number 5. Oh my gosh. Okay. What do I need that I'm not getting, and am I brave enough to speak up for it?
So this is my personal favorite because not that the others aren't important. We have
Mm-hmm.
got to be in touch with our own needs and we've got to be willing to speak up for them. Part of the problem is that people often don't know what they really need. They're either
Right.
dismissing it or disowning it, or they think they won't get it, so they don't want to say it. But the first part is tuning in. Am I feeling lonely? Okay, what's making me feel lonely? Just for example, maybe my husband seems distracted a lot of the time. Maybe I'm part of it. Maybe I'm getting all of my connection from my girlfriends right now instead of from my spouse. Starting to get curious. But if you identify that you're lonely, for example, and part of the problem is that there isn't enough connected time together, then it's having the courage to go to your spouse or your, significant other and just say, look, this is how I'm feeling. And again, I'm coming to you because we're a team, because I love you. I want us to be connected. And I'm taking a real risk to be vulnerable here. It's not easy for me to say this to you, but I hope you can hear me and we can start a conversation. I'm not blaming you. I'm just trying to tell you how I'm feeling. And I want us to be closer. And our needs, the whole point of communication and the whole point of having emotions as a human being is to point us to what we need. So if we're scared, right, we need to do something to seek safety or work through that fear in service of a goal. If we feel joy, then that tells us something good is happening and that we need to celebrate. So every emotion comes up for a reason. They're information processing signals. And if you're feeling hurt or alone or rejected or ignored, whatever it may be, those are clues that there's something you need that you're not getting. And if you can get curious about what that need is first, then it's really important for a healthy, spark filled relationship that we're constantly articulating our needs to one another. And conversely, that we're not shutting the other person down when they have the courage to come to us and say, hey, I'm struggling. I feel disconnected from you and I don't want to. Can we talk about it?
I love that. Like, I feel disconnected from you and I don't want to. Right? Like, I'm not that. I think like the real key is, and if you listen intently to the way that Colette just said all of that, is that it's like coming again from a place of like, here's something I really want, but I'm not blaming you necessarily for it, but I'm asking for your help to achieve it.
Yes, exactly. Beautifully said, Melissa. Yes.
And then I also think like a lot of this is, I do a lot of work with my clients on like, I am responsible, right? I say those 3 words a lot. Like, what am I responsible for? And I think in this particular question, I am responsible to have the conversation. It's kind of like the title of your new book that's coming out next year, right? Like that
Yes.
quiet. And like, I am responsible to have the conversation. Like, again, the results might not be exactly as I intend them, and I might not get the outcome, and I might be met with defensiveness, but I am responsible to have the conversation. Otherwise, I'm not being true to myself. And then that's when I start to
Bingo.
have all of those feelings you talked about, right? Like, where I feel unworthy and I don't feel good about myself because
Yep.
I am being quiet.
Exactly. That's exactly it. It is the primary responsibility of an emotionally mature adult in a relationship is to speak up for your needs. That's how you honor yourself and take care of yourself. And it can't be dependent on the reaction you get from your partner, but you can set yourself up to help your partner hear you by being vulnerable, taking a team approach, and being really, really clear instead of a list of complaints or criticisms, passive aggressive digs, saying nothing and stuffing it until you kind of blow up with frustration. And then it all comes out in just this tsunami and nobody can take it in. But when you come and say, look, I'm feeling really alone. And the risk is, of course, people often hear it as a criticism, even when you say it nicely, right? Like, oh God, if my partner's
Yep.
feeling alone, I'm failing. And we've got to acknowledge that may be there, but hopefully we can talk
Yeah.
about that too and say, I'm not saying you're a failure. It might land on you that way. And if it does, you can tell me. But I don't want to not tell you that I feel lonely, because otherwise we're not going to be able to talk through how to come together. And this is part of where people can turn to other things. It's not just other people and affairs, but
Yeah.
they start
Yeah.
drinking too much, or they start spending all their time with their friends, or they get into an emotional affair. So give
Yeah.
your relationship a chance by being really direct and clear. And it's not easy, but the more you do it, the easier it gets to do.
Yeah, I love that. And then the more like your partner expects those type of conversations too, like they're not so like, where did this come from? And this seems out of the blue. And like, it just becomes a norm where, maybe once a week you sit down and you have your notepad and you guys have some conversations that need to be had, and you guys know you're going to have them. And you know what I mean? Like, it's like, this is just a part of what you do and what your relationship looks like, so that it's not the constant nagging, or that nagging feeling where every day you're kind of picking and saying something. Like, you bring it in a structured type of way. And I found that to be very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. Me too. And I walk this journey myself. I was not somebody who spoke up so assertively, even though I'm an assertive person. In my first marriage, if I didn't get a really great response, I would just go, okay, well, forget it. And then I had all this resentment. So
Yeah.
it's not only that it's not good for the relationship, like you said, Melissa, it's not good for you. Resentment is drinking
Hmm.
poison and expecting someone else to die. It's super
Yeah, I
unhealthy.
know. I know. It is. Oh my gosh. This episode was amazing. 5 questions to ask yourself to bring the spark back in your relationship. I will put everything in the show notes, all your information, your podcast, your website. So if you have loved this episode and you want to follow along with Colette, her stuff is amazing, and she has a new book that will be out next year. And she is just, we're just so grateful that you're back again on the podcast and sharing your, yes, I will call it big brain, big, beautiful brain with us. And I've just really loved the conversation, and I'm excited to have more of them.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me.